Gender are the social meaning that we give to those physical differences.
I have been misgendered 3 times in the past 24 hours at restaurants. Last night, I was at Benihana with my girlfriend, and the server said, "What about you, sir? What would you like to eat?" My girlfriend, God bless her heart, steps in, says, "Actually, that's ma'am." And she looks at my girlfriend and didn't really understand what had happened and said, "No, I'm talking to him."
I feel like in a lot of ways, I of course know that we have grown as a society, but there's so much work that we have to do, especially with trans rights.
There is no religion, there is no philosophy, there is no social theory in the history of mankind that holds up human beings more than Christianity does.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. If I were to ask you to give a really good Christian response to why you don't believe that a boy can be a girl and vice versa, would you be able to give me a really good response? I will be the first to admit that I don't know very much about this topic, so I want to dive in and really kind of think through critically and cordially, of course, around this topic of gender. So I have a clip from a professor who teaches on the subject, and then I have a clip of Bishop Barron who has a Christian teaching on the subject. So let's watch, interact, and try to piece the puzzle together. And again, I'm not here to bash a non-Christian worldview on this matter. I'm just trying to understand. I do want to find some common ground, but I also want to seek to understand the differences as well. Let's go.
And what is gender studies?
So gender studies is sometimes you'll hear, sometimes departments are called women's studies, sometimes they're called gender studies. They have a history that goes back to what's often called the second wave women's movement in the 1970s. They didn't exist before that. But they are departments that specialize in studying relations of gender. And so what is gender? Well, typically the way I teach it in my sociology of gender class is that there is biological sex, and these are the differences, physical differences
Between male and female.
male and female,
Okay.
yes. And then gender are the social meaning that we give to those physical differences. And so, I mean, much like race, right? There are some phenotypical differences between people, but the concept of race is a really socially constructed one that depends, in this country is largely constructed through the history of slavery, et cetera. It's a social arrangement, and similarly with gender. So the fact that, pilots are more often men than women, that's not due to some biological difference. That's due to social differences that we ascribe to, at the end of the day, pretty small biological differences.
All right. So the first thing that sticks out to me is how intertwined critical race theory is with feminist theories and gender ideologies. They're so intertwined, and I never really thought about that. There's a whole system of thought, not just a few arguments here and there around these differing topics. So I'm trying to understand here. So the basic premise I understood concerning gender specifically here is that what she believes is that there is a difference between biological sex and gender. They're not the same things. Now, I do think that I can find common ground on that. How? Well, I do think, like her, that it is wrong to reduce a human to their mere physical anatomy, right? Humans are more than their bodies. I think I could put it that way. And I'm thinking of C.S. Lewis, who basically says that you are not a body with a soul, but rather you are a soul that has a body. And so I think that that makes sense. The sharp difference, though, I think, is the belief that one's physical anatomy is at odds with the essence of who that person is. Okay, well, what do I mean by that? I mean that to have the physical anatomy of a boy correlates to the essence or a soul of boyness. They go together, they can't be severed. So why that is so important is because humans are body and soul composites. They're not just a body. That would be atheism. And she seems to be working off of that premise. No, they really do have a soul. They don't kind of create that, or the soul isn't something like your own self invention and in relation to other self invented identities. No, it isn't that at all. It's not a subjectivism. It really is an objectivism. There's objectivity in this understanding. And therefore, I don't think what she is saying about gender being like race follows. And I want to answer that. So, why do I not believe that to be the case? this might seem kind of crude, but I think that it's helpful. Race and gender are not the same thing, and I can just make a simple observation that I thought about. For example, if you live in Africa, over time there will be, just kind of adaptations that happen within genetics, let's say, of a given tribe, and they will have more melatonin in their skin, right? If you take that same process over again, this would be millennia upon millennia, millennia. If you take that tribe from Africa and put them in Canada, well, over a certain amount of time, they won't have that melatonin anymore and they'll go from black to white. So, this idea of race is not fixed. It's not fixed. It can change predicated upon where the environment that you find yourself in. Is it the same that gender is like that as well? Is gender the same as race in that perspective? I don't think so. Whether a boy is in Africa or Canada, it won't matter how many years pass, they will still be a boy. You could put them on Mars, you could put them on Pluto, and they would still be a boy. So this comparison between gender and race, I don't think is founded. One last thing, and I mentioned it already, is that this idea put forth by the professor is philosophically atheistic because what is being said is that humans have bodies, but their soul is anything that they want it to be. It's just a social construct, for example, is what she's saying. It's self created or self invented. So, in her view, all they have is a body. And they create their own essence, their own soul, if you will, which is really funny and odd when you think about it, because what they're trying to say is you can't reduce a human to just their bodily anatomy, but they also don't think that there's anything beyond the body other than your own whims of self creation, which is very fascinating. All right, those are just some of my thoughts. Let's see what Bishop Barron has to say, and we'll reflect upon a Christian understanding of gender.
That the Imago Dei is not some little special privilege that we hang on to for our own spiritual benefit. Rather, as in the great parable of the talents, the image of God is for the world. We must think of ourselves as representatives of God, bringing His power, His wisdom, His heart, His mind to the world. Image of God is a mission and a responsibility. So that's the main point of my talk. Just keep that in mind. There is no religion, there is no philosophy, there is no social theory in the history of mankind that holds up human beings more than Christianity does. There is no greater humanism than Christianity. Whether it's ancient philosophies of human perfectibility, whether it's Renaissance humanism, whether it's modern philosophies, whether it's a contemporary philosophy of self-actuation, there is no philosophy, religion, or social theory that holds up the human being higher than Christianity does. The claim of the Bible is that we have been made in the image and likeness of God, that we have been imbued with a divine mission, that we are destined for life on high with God. No one says more about the human being than Christianity. There's a wonderful adage from the church fathers. They all repeat it. Deus fit homo, ut homo fieret Deus. It means God became man, that man might become God. Now don't misconstrue it as turning into God. What they meant was God became one of us that we might be sharers in the very divine nature. That's what Christianity is about. That's Imago Dei. You know, the new atheists made their great splash a few years ago, and all they were doing was in a crude form reviving the old atheism. And see, atheism, old and new, is predicated upon the opposite assumption, namely that somehow God is competitive to human flourishing. That God and human beings are at odds with each other. The more glory we give to God, the less glory we get. Read Feuerbach, Marx, Freud, Sartre, the rest of them, and then read Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. The same old tired argument that God is a competitor to human flourishing. Well, listen, everybody, that is inimical to the Bible. The great biblical image is the burning bush. Remember the bush that Moses sees that's on fire but not consumed. When the true God comes close to His creation, He sets it on fire and He makes it radiant and beautiful, and He does not consume it. That's the sign. Look at the saints now. That's the sign that God has come close, that we become luminous and radiant and beautiful. We are not consumed, but we are enhanced. That's why St. Irenaeus, in one of the best summary statements of Christianity, can say, Gloria Dei, homo vivens. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. That's Christianity. That's Imago Dei. And listen, especially young people, don't let the atheists, old or new, teach you otherwise. Don't let the professors of atheism teach you otherwise. That's inauthentic Christianity. They're battling against a straw man. The real thing is a deep, deep humanism.
The initial thought that comes to my mind, and I hadn't really pieced this together before, but we really should see gender not so much as a fixed position of certain individuals, whether they be boys and girls, but it really is an extension of the very nature of God Himself. Boyness is something akin or analogous to some fundamental characteristics of who God is, and girlness as well. And I think oftentimes, because we live in a post reformational world that really has a nominalistic outlook on things, we tend to create a God that is so transcendent that we fail to realize how he is imminently present within even things like gender. It's an extension of who he is. There's just a couple more things that I wanted to mention. You can think through some of the outcomes or applications or deductions from what I just said there. I'm going to have to think through them as well. Remember, I'm kind of going off the cuff here. I don't really think about these things that often. But one of the things that I wrote down here when I was observing Bishop Barron is that our humanity is not for our individual expression or invention, but it is given to us so that we can give it away in sacrificial love for the world. Oftentimes, when we have these discussions around wokeism or gender ideologies, it's all about championing the individual and their choices to express themselves and invent themselves in the ways that they see fit. But the Christian perspective really turns that upside down and all around. We're not so much to live for ourselves and our individual expression and inventions, but rather we are to find ourselves in the prerogatives and plans of God and who He created us to be, and manifest His characteristic of His fundamental nature of sacrificial love to the world. In short, our humanity, who we are, is not so much to find who we are and live into that. I guess that is true in part, but it's much more to find out who God has made us to be and how that impacts and helps other people around us. Number two, humans are made in God's image, not in the image each can fashion. Boyness, girlness is a reflection of God ultimately. And I already hinted at this in the beginning. But again, and it's connected to the first point, but it's seeing that we are God's image imprinted. Um, I think the missing ingredient is when you take an atheistic worldview and therefore you see identity as a social construct. It's not something objective like a soul imprinted within you, but rather it's something that you are to create. Is that you can only hold that position if you don't believe that there is a God. Because if there is a God, you have to find out who he is. And in finding out who he is, you find out more of who you are and what you were created to be. And of course, many theologians have talked about that. The way that Bishop Barron is talking about it is that the glory of God is a human being fully alive. In other words, when you are living in the way that you were created to live, you bring glory to God. What an amazing, amazing truth and an amazing purpose that you find. If you feel like life is purposeless, if you feel like there's no meaning to life, it's precisely probably because you haven't been reflecting recently upon the God who is, and the God who is fundamentally leads you to see who you are and how you are to live in this world. Sacrificial love, already mentioned it. The last point is that biblical sexual ethics and identities are seen as constraints in society when really they are the thing that can make you fully alive. As I said, the glory of God is a human being fully alive. The glory of God in a human being that is fully alive is a human being that truly knows their purpose. And one of the things about our society is that anything that looks like giving yourself away The biblical story theology tells us that if we give ourselves away is actually when we are most filled. We're filled with the Holy Spirit. We're filled with love. We're filled with compassion. We're filled with purpose when we give ourselves away. But the flip of this, the contrary position to that, is what our culture assimilates and cultivates, namely that you need to constrain all of those things that keep you from being what you would desire to be, and it's usually put in the form of something sexual, and it's usually put in terms of your identity, what you want to do with your life, etc. But if we could flip that around and see that it's not so much as a constraint, but it's actually a liberation. I guess I could say it this way: by being constrained by God and his prerogatives and what he would want for your life, coming under his rule and reign is the liberation that your soul so desperately needs. So there's actually a great slavery in autonomous freedom apart from God. And on the contrary, there's actually great freedom in indentured living back to the God who gives you everything that you need. Hopefully that makes sense. I guess the fundamental conclusion that I'm making is that how our culture sees gender, how our culture sees these ideologies is directly contrary to the biblical vision of who God is and who he has made us to be. There's two competing humanisms. One is an atheistic humanism that is built upon the lies that actually entraps you in yourself, and the other is a biblical, theological humanism, which Bishop Barron says is the greatest humanism that actually leads to flourishing. Namely, you look like a burning bush. God is all around you. He is in you, but he's not consuming you. His glory is shining through you. Thinking about that, what an amazing opportunity that we all have, and how sad it is for those that don't find it. Broad is the road that leads to damnation, and narrow is the road that leads to eternal life. The will of God, just how it is. Be thinking about that today. Have a great day, and remember that Christianity is Christ, and without him, there is no Christianity. I think he is the human that is fully alive. Be thinking about that today. Peace.